today we have, the only way I qualify her personally is that she's my guru when it comes to history. But Dr. Meenakshi Jain is, I think, quite undisputably the queen of absolutely impeccable research. She has written a lot of history books that we have all read, where she has worked very hard to show a lot of continuity in lots of ways. She has involved the invaders. She has talked about iconoclasm, and she has made us relook at invasions in very different ways. But this book is completely different. I mean, these are 19 chapters. They are definitely written in a chronological order, but she has compiled 19 ideas that define the Hindus of Hindustan. I don't even know how you started to even to even conceive of the ideas that have in your mind, been distilled to define us, and where does your research begin? So this is a very, very big scope, and I'm very curious to know, how did it all come about?
Thank you, Alo. It's always a delight to have an interaction with you, because you read everything with such care. The amount of powerful presentations that I've heard since morning has been an eye-opener, because it reinforces the point that what a long distance Hindu civilization has covered in these millennia. And Alo has talked about my present book. It's a work that I studied and worked upon for almost a decade. And there was no systematic plan. I did a lot of reading and made notes on the relevant points, because very curious to understand what this civilization is all about. And when it has witnessed so much turbulence and upheaval in its history, how come in a fundamental manner it has not deviated from its founding principles? And so I began to trace, it's a thematic work, it's not chronological, and I began to trace this civilizational journey of a most remarkable people who I am so honored and thrilled to call my ancestors, and whom we all should be proud of. The point is that we don't know enough about them. So this Hindu civilizational journey, I use the term Hindu because by and large, my study stops around the 8th century. I just have a few chapters which discuss the changes that happen in the 8th century. So before the 8th century, the period that I largely cover is a period which predominantly is peopled by people whom we call Hindus. Now, this civilizational journey, as I said, it begins very remarkably from a sukta in the Rig Veda. Now that sukta talks about the area which our founding fathers were aware of. Obviously, when the Indian civilizational journey started, the whole of the subcontinent was not known to our ancestors. So the Nadi Sukta of the Rig Veda, it tells us the area that they were familiar with. They only knew of northwestern India and Punjab. And it is a remarkable case of how the spread of these people and the civilizational idea to eastern India and to the south and to the west can be traced on the basis of certain passages from our sacred scriptures. For example, the movement to eastern India, we can trace in the Shatpatha Brahmana. We have the entry of this culture into the south. We have these myths of Agastya and so many others. Now, the key principles of this civilization are that wherever the people went, it was not barren land. People were already living there. They may be hunters, they may be fish gatherers, whatever they were. But from the absolute word inception, the civilization, it embraced and accepted everyone. So there is no evidence of any discrimination between the so-called Vedic founders of our civilization and the people they encountered in the subcontinent. Now, this journey across the subcontinent was completed by 500 BC. By 500 BC, our ancestors had a very good idea of the physical geography of this entire land. And we have evidence to prove that they knew of the entire physical landscape of the subcontinent when Alexander invades India 2 centuries later, and he thinks that he has reached Egypt and he will go to the Nile and from there cross back and go to the Mediterranean. But when he comes to Punjab, he meets people and he realizes that he's actually lost. So he asks the people of this land to describe this physical landmass. And that description what the people gave him, this much distance in miles from north to east, east to south, that was given by Alexander to the historians who accompanied him, and that is recorded in their accounts which have survived till today. 2000 years later, Alexander Cunningham, who was the first Director General of the Archaeological Survey of India, he studied those reports which Alexander's historians who had accompanied him had written. And he matched it with the actual distance from one place to another. And he said it is absolutely remarkable that more than 2000 years ago, the Indians of this land had such a remarkable knowledge of this land. And it's absolutely accurate. That is the first point that strikes me about this beginning of our civilizational journey. And again, on the basis of sacred texts, the most powerful sentiment that we come across is veneration and adoration of this land. The Nadi Sukta expresses gratitude toward the rivers to which this land owed so much. Then we have Vishwamitra Nadi Sukta, again, homage to 2 rivers that the sage wants their help to cross. And the most important is what is called the Prithvi Sukta, which is part of the Atharvaved. The Prithvi Sukta has been described as the first national song of the world. And it's 63 verses long. So imagine a national song written in BC, which is 63 verses long, and it describes the land and it describes the features of this land, what is happening over here, what are the values of this land. Sabhas, Samitis, Yagyas are performed over here, Ashwins perform their feats, and it talks about the principles of cosmic truth, veneration, penance, etc. So, it is absolutely amazing that before 500 BC, the Indians had a complete knowledge of the geographical locale of their land and early expressions of total veneration and adoration of this land. And, after we cross the Atharvaved, then we have a lot of Bharat Prashastis that are written. These Bharat Prashastis are hymns in praise of the land. And, there are so many of them in the Mahabharata, etc. And Vishnu Puran, it says that, you have to have accumulated merit of hundreds of rebirths to be able to be blessed to be born in this land. And the Bhagavad Puran says that, it is, they're expressing their gratitude to God that, it's a blessing to be born here. Every man cannot be born in this land. And Al-Biruni, who accompanied Mahmud Ghaznavi to India in the 11th century, he writes in the Al-Hind, and these I'm quoting from Al-Hind, he says, the Hindus think there is no country like this, no religion like this, and he goes on and on. So, this absolute veneration of the land was something that was noticeable and hit even foreigners who were coming outside to India and observing this absolute worship and veneration of the land. So these are some very, very early features of our civilization that I found very, very fascinating and interesting. And the thing is that this sentiment persists. There have been talks today about the Islamic advent and the British advent. But my study shows that this attitude of veneration, it remained unchanged, but we have to study when and why it changed. So this is the first part of you.
The next concept that I think is most important, and we listen to it all the time, is the concept of dharma and the Dharma Shastras. So one of the things that I'll tell you what I do in class is when you read the Artha Shastra, when you tell that it's a book of directives, how do you know that actually these principles were put in action? And then you read Radha Kumud Mukherjee, something that you recommended to me. You find a Megasthenes who was there in the times of the Chandragupta Maurya. And that's how you get a foreign account, and then that's how you corroborate and the Ashokan edicts. But your analysis of the Dharma Shastras and the way they were written tells a different story. That's a fascinating story.
Yeah. So what I said was that the underlying theme of this civilization was to assimilate everyone, accommodate everyone, exclude no one, and to find space for everyone. So the Dharma, and the point is that there was so much to be accommodated. So an attempt was made to provide theoretical uniformity, so that there is a theoretical unity, and the absolute divergence of opinions doesn't overwhelm the reader. Now this Dharma Shastra that you talked about, we all know of we all have heard of what is Dharma, but we are unsure of what exactly it means. What is Dharma? Is it law? Is it religion? Etc. So in this period, a lot of Dharma Shastras were written, and the Dharma Shastras claimed that we are the final word on law, and we are deriving our authority from the Vedas because we are sanctifying and recommending what is the law to be followed according to the Vedas. So they are giving themselves the air of legitimacy that whatever we are recommending is sanctioned by the Vedas. This is the claim of the Dharma Shastras in theory. But when we scratch the surface, we find a lot of counter texts which say that Dharma, every community, every caste has the right to follow its own Dharma. And Artha Shastra you mentioned, Artha Shastra says that when the king conquers another territory, he should ensure that he allows the people of those territories to follow their own customs. He should not impose his customs. So, this reinforces the point that Dharma Shastras was actually a record of the customs and practices of every group, every community, however small in India. And there is a Dharma Shastra of Gautama. It says that the dharma of the Shudras is dharma for them. And Narad says that when a king conquers a territory, he should make sure that the laws of that territory are enforced and he does not impose his own laws on them. So the Dharma Shastra literature actually confirms what we think should have been the natural, practice of India, keeping in mind our tradition that we see in the Vedas. And
so she has chronicled inscription after inscription and proof after proof where the law actually reflects the practice. And it's not that the practice has to be in accordance with law. So it is really very much an assimilation.
Yes, it's assimilation, and no attempt is ever made to impose laws from above by the state or by anybody. Every law, every community, however small, whatever the status in society, whatever the hierarchy, it is allowed complete freedom to follow its own laws. It is mandatory for the king to make sure that no imposition is done, and every group follows. There are references to Jati Dharm, Kul Dharm, Desh Dharm, Nagar Dharm. The community of merchants, they have their own dharma because they have their rules of trade, etc. So every community dharma is mentioned even in the Artha Shastra.
And interestingly, the tabulation of these Dharma Shastras was done only when Buddhism under Ashoka started to define Dharma, and that is when we realized the necessity
Yes.
to sort of define and put into stone ours. I
Yeah.
mean, at least scribe.
Yeah. Actually, because there was not felt much need to write texts on Dharma, because it was understood that everybody will be allowed to follow their own religion customs. But with the rise of Buddhism, when the concept of Dharma became so important and center stage, that is when the rest of the society felt that we should also have commentaries on Dharma.
I want to go back a little bit to the consciousness of the geographical extent of the land, because we live in South India, and it's very important for people who live here as well as people in the north to have this consciousness as to how and when and how early the entirety, like you mentioned 500 bit, but can you just show us the progression of how it happened?
Actually, Panini, who lived in the 6th century, he knows of India only up till Pathan. Then Patanjali, he knows of kingdoms further down, and he talks about kingdoms of Kerala. And in the Ashokan inscriptions, they talk about the whole of, but they say that Chola kingdom, Kerala kingdom were not part of Ashoka's empire. So there is evidence from very early on. And Megasthenes also makes some very interesting points. He says, he talks about Kerala, and he says that the kingdom of Kerala, actually it is unique because it is a queendom. It has never been ruled by a man. The woman has always been the ruler. And he actually mentions the migration of certain communities from North India to the Pandya kingdom, for example. And when we look at the subsequent inscriptions, many kingdoms which were ruling in the south, they say that we came from the north. For example, the Chalukya kingdom, they say that, 59 of our kings ruled in Ayodhya, and after that we migrated. So the point that I'm making is that the people in the entire length and breadth of this country, they always try to associate themselves and link themselves with what we call the All India tradition. They never said that we are separate, we have nothing to do with this tradition. All the kings said we are descendants of certain particular hero from the Mahabharata or from the Ramayana. The inscriptions of so many kings, they say that I am ruling like Ram used to rule, And so this constant invocation of all India symbols, all India cultural heroes, this is there right from the beginning. There is this Ikshvaku dynasty that was ruling in Andhra, and they say that we are belonging to the same clan as Lord Ram. So I'm not getting into whether it's true or not, but no king says that I'm outside this cultural stream. They all want to link themselves with this cultural stream, which is derived from incidents of the Mahabharata, Ramayana, our cultural heroes. And that is something that is really remarkable.
The next question, in fact, it was a surprise for me, because when you think of temples, you often think of by patronage by the kings, by the rulers.
Yes.
But your book gives an astoundingly different picture of who patronized and the kinds of contributors that we had for temples.
Yeah, but before I come to the kings, what is absolutely remarkable is the involvement of women as patrons. For example, in Mathura, there was this tradition of what is called ayag pattas, where tablets were made, which were put flat tablets like a mobile, and there would be a swastik or something on one side, and it would be placed and would be used for worship. And excavations at Mathura found almost 99% of the ayag pattas had been donated by women. And that is absolutely, when we talk about feminism and all that, we have to keep this in mind that the donors in North India were largely women. Second point is that the temples, for example, at Sanchi, the original stupa at Sanchi was of bamboo and mud, which was built by Ashok. And about 100 years later, when new construction methods came and they thought they'll make a bigger stupa with, stone, etc., So a big stupa was made, the remnants of which we see now. Now this stupa was completed by, it was started about 200 BC and completed by 100 AD. Now, what is fascinating about this stupa, that 610 inscriptions relating to that stupa have been found and have been documented and published. So of these 610 inscriptions which are documented and published, there are only 3 inscriptions which mention a royalty, and that also in a very, very, vague manner. The rest of the inscriptions record the donations of ordinary people. So the point that we have to keep in mind, that when we talk about this civilization, how has it survived so long? It is because every person contributed to this, related to this. I mean, out of 610 inscriptions, 607 are by people who are they? Who are these ordinary people? There are some workers who actually help in the construction of the stupa. For example, there were ivory workers from Vidisha who were invited to carve a gateway, a part of a gateway. So the inscription on Sanchi Stupa is still standing, that we are the ivory workers who had come from Vidisha and have carved this gateway, and we are gifting this gateway that we have carved to this stupa. So, metal workers, laborers, of course, monks, nuns, household workers. I mean, the list is absolutely amazing. And they're coming from all parts of India. And Buddhist caves at Nasik, Karle, Junar, in the Western Ghats, they also are contributors, are ordinary people. And it is very interesting that there is one inscription. He says, I'm an Eka driver. Eka driver means like a rickshaw person. So he says, I carry people to and fro, and I have contributed this. It is, and the first murti that has been found of Saraswati from Mathura is by a metal worker. He was a metal worker, and he's saying that I am gifting this murti of Saraswati. None of the important early Buddhist statues, Buddha statues at Mathura were gifted by royalty. They were all the gifts, the absolutely magnificent, huge Buddha figures, the contributions were of ordinary nuns, monks, ordinary laymen, and people who have given their contribution have been proud to contribute to the cause and have recorded their things. And when we talk about these records, we must keep in mind that India, especially North India, was invaded time and time again. So there is no inscription that has survived intact. Most inscriptions have been lost. So many of them have been damaged. But whatever has survived explains why this civilization has survived, because it was the contribution of ordinary people, it was protected by ordinary people, and they ensured that the civilization survives in some manner even when it was threatened,
So continuity and the epics.
Yeah.
The epics have continuity and have contributed to the geography of the land, to the sacredness of the land, to the versions of the epics that exist everywhere. So can you just tell us that what are the themes in your book that the epics actually cover? Just the epics here.
But just before that, I want to say that the importance of Tirth as an all India institution. No religious leader promoted parochialism. Shankara did not say that I'm from Kerala, so you only do your Tirths in Kerala. So the vision of everybody was from Himalayas to Kanyakumari. And in fact, I wanted to say this earlier, Kautilya, he was the first person to articulate the idea of political unity. In the Arth Shastra, he says that from the Himalayas to the seas, there should be one ruler. It did not mean that there was political unity, but that ideal that it should, that is the field of the Chakravarti Raja. So this concept of Chakravarti Raja, even if a king was ruling in 10 villages, he said, I am Chakravarti. Because this, this awareness of an all India concept, it had percolated to every level. There was no concept, actually there was no concept which did not percolate to the lowest level of society. You talked about the Ramayana and the Mahabharata. The Ramayana, Camille Bulke, he calculated how many versions of the Ramayana there were. And he found that he was aware of 300 versions of the Ramayana. There was no region of India which did not have its own version of the Ramayana. So it had become an all India text. As far as the Mahabharata is concerned, the spread of the Mahabharata is an absolutely fascinating story. And this is a work that has been done by a scholar, and I think his work should be known. When Sukhtankar was preparing the critical edition of the Mahabharata, he and his team invited versions of the Mahabharata from various parts of the country. So they got God knows how many 100 versions. And the rule is that whichever version is the shortest is closest to the original version. So in the North India, they got the Sharda version. In the South, from the Tamil region, they got a very elaborate version of the Mahabharata, which was much longer than the original version. So obviously it had so many editions, it could not be. But they were surprised that the shortest version of the Mahabharata from South India came from Kerala. Now, Kerala was furthest away from North India. In that corner of Kerala, how did the shortest version of the Mahabharata reach there? And then this scholar did a backtracking. And he found that in 500 BC, 500 Brahmins migrated from Mathura to the Tamil region. And 500 they migrated because they calculated that we can marry among ourselves, we don't have to marry, all that Gotra and all that. And they took with them the version of the Mahabharata that was available in the Mathura region around 500 BC. And that version from Mathura remained in the Tamil region till the 7th century AD. In the 7th century AD, there was this episode which is called the Kalbhra interregnum. So they migrated from Tamil region and they went to Kerala. And these are people that we know as the Nambudri Brahmins. So the Nambudri Brahmins, they kept that version of the Mahabharata, which they had taken from Mathura 500 BC, and it was a frozen text that remained in Kerala. So, and from there, Sukhtankar and his team got it, and they based the South Indian version on this text. So I'm saying that every story that you try to understand of the ancient period, it's a remarkable story of how this whole vast land with primitive means of communication was kept intact, united by the same values, united by veneration of the land, and nobody was kept out of it. In fact, we talk so much about the caste system. Gautam says that a rishi, an Arya, and a Malech are to be respected if they have special knowledge of particular thing, because knowledge is what we cherish. And this Al-Baruni, he writes that the Greeks are Malechas, but they have learning, and that is why they're venerated in India. So Indian veneration for learning, and there is this concept which I think you alluded to, but I will elaborate, that this concept, I've told you about Dharma, but there was another important concept, the concept of Aryavat. Now, what was this concept of Aryavat? The concept of Aryavat was a place where correct speech and correct conduct prevailed. That means Shishtachar, those people spoke correct language and they had proper conduct. And the people who were the custodians of learning, that is the Brahmins, they only had enough grain to store in a small jar, and they cultivated learning for its own sake and not for any value. So this was the concept of Aryavart. It was first confined to a small region. As the Vedic founders became aware of larger parts of India, Aryavart became Brahm Rishi Desh, Madhya Desh, and up till the Narmada, it became all pure land. Then, subsequently, Medhatiti, he writes that, land itself is not impure. Land itself cannot be impure. So, how do we cultivate the rest of the land? If you follow the practices of society, the social order in the north, then the south or whichever part of India can also be Aryavart, because land itself is not impure. So, this broadness of mind, this not being rigid about anything, about accepting the practices of everyone they encounter, of venerating knowledge from whoever it may be. And if I can move on. Please do. We have this thing that, we became a closed society with the coming of Arabs and Turks in the 8th century. Actually, it may surprise you that in the ancient period, that is before the 8th century, large parts of northwestern India were ruled for a long time by a series of foreign rulers. Greeks, Shakas, Kushans, Huns, they all ruled over large parts of northwestern India. And there are some things that we should know about this. None of these rulers, they were rulers. None of them tried to impose any value system on the people that they conquered. In fact, we have inscriptions and other evidence, coins. So they all immerse themselves in the sacred tradition of this land. Some become followers of Shiva, some become followers of Vishnu, etc., etc. And what is the evidence? I'm not just giving, loose talk. This is not loose talk. We have for the Kushans, we have their coins that have survived. In the case of the Kushans, there is a beautiful sculpture in Mathura Museum where two young men are dressed in Kushan attire and are bowing before a shivling. There is Menander, he was a Bactrian Greek. His conversion to Buddhism is immortalized in a play, Milind Panu. Milind Panu means that the dialogues of King Milind. And what were these dialogues? He went around large parts of North India interacting with religious leaders. And then he met Nagsen, who was a Buddhist monk, and he has a long dialogue with him, and he accepts that, this person has more knowledge, and he embraces Buddhism. We have all heard of Huns. They were barbarians. They destroyed and burnt wherever they went. In Gwalior Fort, Alexander Cunningham found an inscription which says that Meher Kula, the Hun, bowed before Pashupati Shiva. So, there is no evidence of any of these people disturbing the religious harmony of this land. The Shakas, we have the queen, Shaka queen, the Mathura pillar statue has been found. It's in British Museum now. At the back of the statue is an inscription which records her donation to the Sangh. Rudra Daman Shaka in Western India, his inscription is the first inscription in Sanskrit. He's a foreigner, and he writes in that inscription that I compose kavyas in Sanskrit. I honor Brahmins. I, do so much charity. So all this evidence is something that we have to contrast with what happens to us later. And Patanjali, when he talks about these people, he says that these people are Shudras. but they don't have to be expelled from the dish. Expelled from the dish means that if they use utensils, you don't have to throw away the utensils. Those utensils can be washed and cleaned. And there is a very interesting dialogue of a king when he's imagining a dialogue with Indra. And he says that these malechas, how are we to integrate them? What are the societal norms? Indra says they don't have to do any prayashchit, there is no ceremony. If they start accepting and living like their neighbors, then they are pure for us. So this kind of, there was no barrier between, I don't know when these concepts of barriers became part of our syllabus and curriculum and thinking, because in the ancient period, there doesn't seem to be. Because the lawmakers, Manu, he says there are only 4 castes. There is no 5th caste. And the 4 castes, the 5th caste are those who are people who are the offspring of mixed varnas. So he never says that they are, outcasts in that sense. He says a Brahmin has a relationship with a Vaishya, then the son is a, 5th varna. But otherwise, the varnas are 4 and the rest are derived from them. So look at the capacious attitude of, and Manu whom we revile and we think that he's a very hardbound person who laid down strict rules. He's saying there is no 5th caste, all are descendants of mixed marriages on these 4 castes. And he says that it is very easy for a person who's of a low caste to enhance his status by just following the practices. What are the practices? Observe your sacred duties and show respect to Brahmins. So this kind of social order is so different from what we are taught in our schools and colleges, that was a rigid caste-bound society, close to everyone. And but when we look at the text, it is a totally different picture that we get. And so much of this, flexible attitude, it was a real surprise to me also when I began this study. And I just want to say that why did this attitude change? I have made the point that before the coming of the Arabs and Turks, though large parts of northwestern India and even Gujarat and Maharashtra were ruled by foreign dynasties whose ancestry we can trace, and I have traced in my book, there is no attempt of them imposing their own values or belief systems on the native population. In fact, they embrace what they found in that locality. So we don't have any memory of, Kushans being raiders or Shakas being raiders or etc. Now, this situation changes in the 8th century. And why it changes is because of the total assault on our belief systems with the arrival of the Arabs and Turks. And this is something that Al-Baruni, who came with Mahmud Ghaznavi, who wrote a fantastic study of Hindu society called the Al-Hind. He stayed in India for a long time and, studied India in depth, and he's written a most fantastic book on India at his time. And he says that the Hindus, they used to respect learning. They didn't look at whether you were a foreigner or not, they respected your learning. And he says, but why did this attitude change? When and why did this attitude change? And he says, then, the Arabs came. And he gives a vivid description of Muhammad bin Qasim's attack on Multan. And he says that, Muhammad bin Qasim was told that the wealth of Multan is coming from the Sun Temple, which gets, offerings from all over India. And he says that Muhammad bin Qasim was told that this is a very sacred place for the community, and he hung a cow's flesh around the neck of that deity, Sun Temple. And he says that, this is something that continued after that. And he says by the time he comes to Mahmud Ghaznavi, who was his patron, he says, the systematic destruction of all their holy sites, Somnath, Mathura, He names them all. And he writes a very, very moving account. He says that the Hindus became like atoms of dust scattered in all directions. So they, took retreat and they hid in far off places like Kashmir, where our arms cannot reach. And he says from that day, they have the most hostile attitude towards us, and the mothers frighten their crying children at night by saying, the Turks are coming. So that kind of, and I just take 2 minutes more. And no, and what I want to say when I contrast this with 2 examples that I want to give. There was a group of sun worshippers in Iran. They were called Magas. They used to worship sun. And so it is said that Krishna's son suffered from leprosy. So he invited 20 families of Maga Brahmins to come and settle in Multan and to practice sun worship, and his son also got cured. Those Magas who came from Iran, because they were priests in Iran, Indian society gave them the designation of Brahmins, and they were called Maga Brahmins. And the Maga Brahmins soon spread over large parts of India. They were venerated by every king, they were given donations, whatever. But I'm saying they completely amalgamated, and Vara Mihira was also a Maga Brahmin. The other group that we have, and this Maga Brahmin documentation is fully there, when they came, how they came, where they went, those inscriptions and all I've quoted. And then there is another group, the Kamboj. They are supposed to have participated in the Mahabharata war, and they were specialists in making kambals, blankets. And they say that in Yudhishthir's coronation ceremony, they gifted kambals. This is all recorded in the Mahabharata. And those people, they are also the kind of veneration that they are given. The point that has to be noted is that Hindu society did not shut its doors to anyone. It accorded respect, admiration to anyone who came and gave a status according to their profession and their calling in their home, and that is what they did over here. We are talking about the decolonization of the Hindu mind. It is very, very sad that in the last 50 or 100 years, we are learning the history that the British taught us. The British taught us that there was no India before we came. But Kautilya, well before the British came, was saying that from North India to South India, there should be one ruler. And I mean, the hatred that we have towards ourselves, towards our priestly community, to our educated, the learners of our community, we have contempt for everybody. And that shows how much decolonization has to be done by all of us, because we are wittingly or unwittingly going on parroting what the British have taught us. We have become aware to some extent, but there's a very, very long distance that we have to travel.
So, why am I even here? Please go ahead.
No.
The thing is that she has 2 sections to her book. So, the first part is before the Islamic invaders, and then she has a part B when you have the, as she said, Muhammad bin Qasim's advent. Now, what is to be noted, I just come to the end. This is the last point, and then we'll throw. Is that we are told a narrative, that there was coexistence. That somehow we are Hindus, there are Muslims, and we lived a coexistence, and now we are having this strife. We are putting in fissures into society. But then it's very, very clear.
Yeah. I'll answer this because time is running out.
Yeah, you have to answer 2 points. One is that the local narrative is that people who converted could not give up their old practice. But you have to talk about the patronage of foreign nobility and what that.
No, but it depends on how much time is there. Okay, so I'll answer the Rajput question first, because
I think that is the new part.
Yeah. You see, the point is that we have been told that there was Hindu-Muslim unity, and till the British came, the Hindu-Muslim unity was fine. And the best example that has been given to us is the Mughal marriage alliances with Rajputs. Now, this is a subject that really needs to be investigated for some very simple reasons. The Mughals, in their court histories, never said that we have married Rajput women. Jahangir never said that I'm the son of I'm a half Rajput by birth. They all said that we are pure Timurids. So when we talk, I don't know how we get these slogans and we go on burdening ourselves with such rubbish. So no Persian court history mentions Mughal Badshah's marriages with Rajput. And the Rajputs they were marrying were also Rajput royal families, isn't it? So it was not that they were marrying beneath their status. So, but no Persian history mentions Mughal relations or marriages with Rajputs. That is only half the story. The Rajputs were very petrified at what they were doing. And they felt that, we need to explain. We need to explain to our future generations what we have done. So the Rajput rulers in their courts, they get rival histories written. Can you imagine? Akbar is getting the Akbarnama written in his court, and his friend and relative, brother-in-law, Man Singh, is getting another history written at the court of Ambar that is called Man Charit. That is the history of the Man Singh's family. And in that, the writer, the historian, writes that, Man Singh's grandfather, he comes from such a noble family of warriors, etc., and the battles he won, etc., etc. But Man Singh's historian does not write that Man Singh's grandfather gave his daughter in marriage to Akbar. This is absolutely remarkable that we are supposed to be, learning about Muslim or Mughal Rajput relations as the bedrock of, that period, that the Mughals were so accommodating and the Rajputs were equal partners. But what kind of a patronage is this that the Persian histories don't mention the Rajput marriages, and the Rajput princes, Rajput history don't mention that we gave our daughters in marriage to the Mughals. So you can imagine what a troubled relationship it was. And in fact, the Mughal Emperor Farrukh Siyar, when he died, then as soon as he died, this Rajput Rana of Mewar, I think it was, he marched into the Mughal court and brought out his widowed daughter and took her back home. So you can imagine what a burden it must have been to have given his daughter in marriage. Then Mewar, Marwar and Jaipur, 3 royal Rajput houses, they signed an agreement amongst themselves that in future we will never give a daughter in marriage to the Mughals. So, this is, we have to learn to come to terms with so many. It's not something that is pleasant, but we should acknowledge it. Why should we go on saying, yes, Akbar did a great thing by, marrying. Did Jahangir say that I'm the son of a Rajput woman? And the last point that, because we have 5 minutes, so the last point that Alo asked me to make was about the limited participation given to non-Muslims in the entire medieval period, beginning from the Sultanate period till the end of the Mughal Empire. So the facts are there, the statistics are there, I've mentioned them in my book, but just to cut a long story short, in Akbar's time, 70% of his officials, mansabdars, were Muslims, 30% were non-Muslims, 30% was divided between 15% Rajputs and 15% Indian Muslims. Now Akbar, being a very wise person, chose these 2 allies because nobody will follow the leadership of the Rajputs and replace the Mughals by a Rajput on the Mughal throne. And Indian Muslims, no foreign Muslim is going to accept their leadership. So 70% of Akbar's ruling class consisted of Turanis who had come from Central Asia and Iranis who had come from Persia. So the limited participation of non-foreign nobility in the Mughal setup is something that is really not attended to. And I just want to close this argument by saying that after the death of Aurangzeb, the governors had to be appointed to three important Mughal provinces of Bengal, Awadh, that is UP, and Hyderabad. In UP, the person who was appointed governor of that state was someone who had come from Iran in 1706 and was appointed governor of that important place in 1722. So what are we talking about? 1706, somebody comes from Iran. He doesn't know anything about this land. It's just that he's from the ruling fraternity and he's given the important place of Mughal governor of UP, and that's the family that continues to rule UP till 1857. In Hyderabad, the person who's appointed governor of Hyderabad comes at the time of Shah Jahan, and he says that I am a descendant of Abu Bakr, the second caliph. And his descendants continue, and that last Nizam died, I think, a few months ago. Isn't it? And the same thing. So the thing is that, it's a battle of ideas. What we are engaged in as a society is a battle of ideas. Because we are not going to physically, attack each other. At least people in this room will not do that. The thing is that if you are engaged in a battle of ideas, you have to have the facts which can counter and put the other person in the defensive. Because we are not aware of the facts or ill-informed, the other person goes on getting an advantage, And can I just give one last example in my thing? Now, last example I want to give of how separate they were from us always. And that is the question of language. Akbar was the person who made Persian the language of administration at all levels. Even the village patwari had to learn Persian. Why did he not make any language of the subcontinent? It's because Persian was, you can draw your own conclusions. And so, how do people learn Persian at such a short time? So he imported a large number of people from Iran to come to India and to teach Persian. And he revised the madrasa curriculum so that Khatris and Kayas, those who are working in the government, can learn Persian quickly. And like we speak English with the Hindi, our accent, and we have so many words that we have incorporated into English. Akbar, fatafat, jaldi, hartal, all these words have become part of English. Akbar was very clear that no non-Persian word should make its way into Persian, and Persian pronunciation should not be compromised. So he got dictionaries prepared so that if you are not certain about a Persian word, you look up the dictionary and find that Persian word. Persian is not supposed to be indigenized at all. And finally, when the hold of the Mughal Empire became weak and they had to substitute Persian for another language, the natural choice should have been Hindavi, which was the naturally evolving language of the subcontinent. And Hindavi drew words from all over the country. But for the Persian religious and intellectual elite, the problem with Hindavi was that it had a large number of Sanskrit, Tatsam and Tatbhav words. So what did they do? They started a process of throwing out Sanskrit words from Hindavi and substituting them with Arabic and Persian words. I'll just give one example. मुझे ये कार्य प्रातः करना है. ठीक है? मुझे ये काम सुबह करना है. So, a Muslim language was created out of a non-Muslim language. And the Arabic and Persian words were so filled that it became a very difficult language to understand. So to conclude, I want to say that India was a very open, liberal, elastic, broad-based society known for its veneration of the land and incorporating everyone, the people who contributed to the civilizational heritage, whether it was temples, whatever it was all strata of society, including women. So when we talk about, a matriarchal system, patriarchal, we have to keep this in mind. And foreigners were also recorded their inscriptions at Sanchi, etc., that we have donated this. So it was welcoming everybody. That was the system that it was. Things changed. We had Northwest ruled by foreign dynasties who were also accepting and embracing. Things changed with the Arabic and Turkish arrival. I've discussed briefly how the whole tenor of this land, it was just totally disrupted, and it was recorded by Persian writers themselves. It is a miracle that we have survived so long, and the only explanation I can give is because this society, this civilization was made by the contributions of ordinary people. It was not a state-sponsored civilization. It was not a top-heavy thing. It was the people who contributed, and that is why it withstood the test of time until Marxist historians came into the field, and they have completely, and they have succeeded, no, and they have succeeded in really brainwashing us.